skeletons speak with such a screech. You'll shake and shudder in surprise when you hear these zombies shriek. Spooky, scary skeletons and shivers down your spine. Shrieking skulls will shock your soul and seal your doom tonight. Spooky, scary skeletons.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Emily. She had a favorite doll that she carried everywhere with her. The doll's name was Samantha, and it had bright blue eyes that seemed to follow Emily wherever she went. One night, Emily woke up to find Samantha sitting at the foot of her bed, staring at her with its unblinking eyes. She tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Eventually, she got up and put the doll on the shelf across the room before going back to bed. The next morning, Emily woke up to find Samantha back in her bed again, this time with the covers pulled up to its chin as if it had been sleeping next to her all night. Emily was terrified and didn't know how the doll had gotten there. From that day on, strange things started happening around the house. Emily would hear footsteps coming from empty rooms, and doors would creak open and shut on their own. She would often find Samantha in different parts of the house, even though she had left it in one place. One day, Emily discovered a hidden compartment in the back of the doll's head. Inside, she found a note that read, "I will always be with you." Emily realized that Samantha was not just an ordinary doll, but a vessel for a malevolent spirit that had attached itself to her. Terrified, Emily tried to get rid of Samantha, but every time she threw it away or locked it up, it would always find its way back to her. Slowly, Emily began to lose her mind, tormented by the doll and the spirit that controlled it. In the end, Emily disappeared without a trace, and no one ever saw her again. Some say that Samantha still wanders the halls of Emily's old home, waiting for someone new to possess. It was a dark and stormy night, and Sarah was all alone in her big old house. She had just finished watching a scary movie and was feeling uneasy. She tried to shake off the feeling and went to bed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. No matter how hard she tried, sleep wouldn't come. Suddenly, an eerie sound echoed from down the hall. As Sarah crept out of her bedroom, the noise grew louder, and she noticed a thin stream of light coming from the vent at the end of the hall. She slowly shuffled towards the vent, her heart thumping in her chest. She looked through the vent and saw a figure casting a strange glow with a purple orb in its hands. Sarah's eyes widened in horror as she realized the figure was chanting spell-like words. She knew she had to get away before it was too late. In a panic, she rushed back to her bedroom and barricaded the door with all her furniture. She huddled on her bed, covering her ears, until morning came. When morning arrived, Sarah fled to her neighbor's house, where she stayed until the figure was gone. She had never seen anything like that before, and still isn't sure what exactly she saw, but she will never forget that terrifying night. In the small town of Oakville, there was a young woman named Millie who had just moved into a new apartment. She loved the location of her new home and felt quite content living in such a quiet and serene neighborhood. Little did she know that her peace was about to be shattered. One evening, she was walking home from work and noticed a large figure following her in the shadows. She quickened her pace, but the figure would not leave her alone. He kept stalking her every movement as she walked home. Desperately, she sprinted the final 100 yards to her front door, barely managing to lock it before the mysterious man could reach her. Millie had no idea who this figure was or why he was following her. She frantically looked out the window and saw him standing still, watching her. The terror of the situation consumed Millie, who called the police. The police arrived and found the stalker lurking outside Millie's apartment building. After they arrested him, they discovered he had been following Millie for days and that he was obsessed with her. Thankfully, Millie was safe, but the incident left her feeling violated and scared. It started as a normal day at Rosewood High School. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and the students were chatting excitedly about the upcoming talent show. But what started out as a pleasant day quickly turned into a nightmare. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the calm. Everyone turned to find a being standing before them. It was tall and slender, with one eye in the middle of its face and wispy tendrils of darkness that seemed to be reaching for them. It sent out a menacing energy, filling the air with fear. No one knew who or what it was, but everyone knew one thing: it was evil. Students tried to run, but their feet were rooted to the ground. They looked around desperately for help, but the teachers had vanished. The being spoke up in a voice that cut through the tension like a sharp blade. It declared that it had come from the depths of a dark abyss, and it wanted one thing: a sacrifice. Someone had to stay and face whatever fate it had planned. As the students slowly backed away, a brave senior volunteer stepped forward. The creature slowly floated towards him and extended a skeletal hand. Fear stung the air as the creature clasped the student's arm and disappeared, the sound of evil laughter echoing in the hallways. No one ever saw what became of the student, but they never forgot his bravery that day.
Mia had just moved into her new apartment and was excited to start her new life. But as she settled in, she felt a strange presence lurking in the shadows. The first night, she heard strange noises coming from the walls. It sounded like whispers and little feet running across the floor. Afraid, Mia decided to stay up all night, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't keep her eyes open. When she woke up the next morning, she noticed that some of her furniture had been moved around and her closet door was wide open. She quickly shut the door and locked it, hoping whatever was lurking in the shadows hadn't gotten in. But as the days went on, the activity only increased. Mia heard growling and scratching noises coming from inside her walls and saw strange shadows in the corners of her room. Finally, she could no longer take it and decided to move out. As she packed her belongings, the door to her bedroom flew open and a figure stepped out. Mia screamed and ran for the front door. As she reached for the knob, she felt two hands grab her from behind, and with one final heave was thrown out the window. Mia fell to the street below and died.
Once upon a time, there was a beautiful antique mirror that had been passed down through generations of a wealthy family. It was said to hold a mysterious power that captivated anyone who looked into it for too long. One evening, a young woman was admiring the mirror's intricate details when she noticed something strange. It seemed to be shifting, as if a person or something was moving around deep within it. Terrified, she stepped back and watched as an evil creature with glowing red eyes emerged from the depths of the glass. Paralyzed with fear, the woman soon found out that the creature was a malicious spirit, determined to feed off her life force. With nowhere to run, she felt the creature slowly sapping away her life energy until she eventually lost consciousness. The next morning, the woman awoke in her bedroom, but the memory of what had happened the night before haunted her. The mirror was no longer in sight, and the only thing left was a mysterious message etched onto it that read, "Never look into the mirror." As a child, Emily had an imaginary friend named Lucy. Her parents thought it was sweet, and just a normal part of growing up. But as Emily got older, she started to realize that Lucy wasn't like other imaginary friends. Lucy became more and more demanding of Emily's time, and her behavior more and more erratic. When Emily refused to do what Lucy wanted, she would become angry, throwing temper tantrums and even physically pushing Emily around. Emily was frightened by Lucy's violence, but she didn't know how to get rid of her. Eventually, Emily confided in her parents about Lucy, and they decided to take her to a therapist to see if they could help. But their efforts were futile. Lucy refused to cooperate, spitting obscenities and causing physical disruptions during the sessions. As the weeks went on, Emily's fear of Lucy intensified. She found herself unable to sleep at night, terrified that Lucy would hurt her if she didn't do what she wanted. Then one night, Emily heard a loud crash coming from her room. Lucy had broken into her house, intent on making her pay for disobeying her. Emily's parents rushed in to try and protect her, but Lucy had already done too much damage. In the morning, the family found out that Emily had suffered a fatal heart attack during the struggle and died. The tragedy left Emily's family grief-stricken, and they never fully recovered the death of their only daughter.
Once upon a time, there was a teenage girl named Shelley who loved babysitting for families in her neighborhood. She had been doing it for a few years, always getting requests from happy parents who trusted her with their children. One summer evening, Shelley got a last-minute request to babysit for 2 children, Sean and Jenny. Shelley accepted the offer, but when she arrived at the house, a chill ran down her spine. The house had an eerie atmosphere, with huge shadows dancing on the walls from the streetlights outside. Nevertheless, Shelley was determined to get the job done, so she greeted the children and started playing with them in the living room. After a few hours, the children asked if they could play hide and seek in the dark. Shelley reluctantly agreed, but as soon as she shut off the lights, strange noises started coming from all around the house. Shelley kept searching for the children, but they were nowhere to be found. Suddenly, something grabbed Shelley's leg and a low voice whispered in her ear, "We're here." Shelley screamed and opened the lights. But no one was there. She went upstairs to the kids' room and saw that they both were sleeping peacefully. She thought, if the kids were sleeping upstairs, that with whom I was playing hide and seek with? Shelley was scared by the experience and quickly gathered her things to leave. From that day forward, she never accepted any more late-night babysitting requests. Jenna was home alone. She had always loved horror movies and stories, but tonight she was regretting her decision to watch them alone. As she sat in her living room, her eyes glued to the TV in anticipation, a loud knock on the door made her jump. She reluctantly got up and opened the door, only to find a hooded figure standing before her. He stepped in without asking and she backed away in fear, feeling an icy chill run down her spine. The figure slowly removed his hood and revealed an eerily familiar face. Jenna gasped. It was the same man she had seen in the horror movie she had just been watching. He smiled at her in a knowing way and opened his mouth to speak. "Don't be afraid, Jenna. I have come to warn you of what is to come."
Lila and Lulu were a rare set of conjoined twins, joined at the hip and sharing a liver. They had always lived their lives together, never knowing any different. They had been born into a world that didn't seem to understand them and were regularly ostracized and ridiculed for their differences. One day, their small town was shaken by a series of gruesome murders, with the bodies never being found after the initial discovery. The police had no leads and the public began to panic, believing that a mysterious monster was on the loose. Lila and Lulu's parents became increasingly suspicious of the twins, believing that they had something to do with the disappearances. Despite protesting their innocence, they were subjected to isolation and interrogations. The truth was eventually revealed when Lila and Lulu took off their clothes in front of the police, revealing the hideous truth. They had become one entity, with their shared liver literally connecting them to one another. It was soon discovered that they had been killing people in order to feed themselves, as their single organ could not receive enough nourishment on its own. The shocked townspeople quickly put the twins on trial for their monstrous crimes, with the public convinced that only monsters could do such things. Lila and Lulu were sentenced to life in prison, where they would spend the rest of their days in solitary confinement, doomed to spend eternity with the knowledge that they were forever trapped in one another.
The dark appetite. It was the middle of the night, and the house was silent except for the sound of Sharon's chew. The woman had always been obsessed with food, and lately, she had been eating more than ever before. She couldn't stop herself, and the craving was driving her to do things that she never thought possible. One night, Sharon decided to try something different. She opened the larder and found a tin of food with no label. She opened it up, and to her horror, discovered that it was filled with human flesh. She was so horrified, but so hungry, that she ate some of it before she could stop herself. From that point on, Sharon's obsession with food only grew worse. She began to secretly eat other people's flesh, stealing from the graves at night and consuming their remains in her own home. She was completely consumed by her dark appetite. Only when the police caught her and sent her to an asylum did Sharon realize the gravity of her actions and the depravity of her hunger. Even so, she still couldn't control her cravings, and it seemed as if nothing would ever satisfy this dark Appetite.
Hi. My name is Amber. I live with my family and a cat named Lucy. We recently shifted into a new house and Hazel was demanding for baby chicks. So we bought 10 of them. One night I woke up to a strange noise coming from outside. So I got up to check, but there was nothing. Next day I noticed that the 2 chicks were missing. Then 3. Then 4. I was so worried about it, but Jack said it might be Lucy. But how come I never noticed? Most of the time she's always with me. One night I woke up to get a glass of water. So I went to the kitchen. As I went there I heard a strange noise. I was so scared to go alone, so I went outside with Jack. As we followed the strange noise we went to the chicks' cabin, and what we saw was so horrifying that I forgot to scream. Noah was there. At the corner facing the wall eating raw chicks. In both of his hands were the chicks. And necks of the chicks were gone and blood was dripping through his mouth. Next day we took Noah to the psychiatric. He is getting better day by day, but I will never forget that horrifying scene ever in my life.
Once, there was a beautiful bride named Betty. She lived in a grand estate with her wealthy family and was set to marry a wealthy businessman, Henry. The day of the wedding arrived. And as Betty was getting dressed in her bridal suit, she felt a chill go down her spine. She saw the reflection of an old woman in her mirror with a sinister look in her eyes. Frightened, Betty tried to ignore the woman in her reflection and finished getting ready for her wedding. When it came time for Betty to walk down the aisle, she stopped abruptly and gasped at what she saw. At the back of the church stood an old woman wearing a long white dress and veil, her eyes fixed upon Betty. The guests were horrified by this strange figure and did not know what to make of it. Some believed it was an omen, while others assumed it was a ghost. Betty was too scared to move, but Henry ran to her side, took her hand and said, "Come on, let's get married. Nothing is going to stop us now." And so, the wedding proceeded, though Betty couldn't help but feel a chill every time she looked into the direction of the mysterious woman. After the ceremony, Betty and Henry returned to their estate, and soon enough, Betty had forgotten all about the strange woman at the back of the church. However, the nightmare was far from over. Weeks later, Betty began having horrible nightmares in which she found herself in a black forest, being chased by the mysterious old woman. These nightmares continued every night, until Betty eventually confronted the woman in her dream. The old woman told Betty that she wanted revenge because Betty had stolen her rightful place as the bride. Betty awoke with a start in her own bed, safe and sound. She never experienced the nightmare again, though the memory always stayed with her. To this day, Betty still wonders who the frightening woman in white dress was and why she wanted her revenge. Luna sat alone on the pier, listening to the soothing sound of the waves lapping against the wooden platform. It was her favorite spot and she often visited it to escape the stresses of life. Little did she know that tonight, her peaceful sanctuary would become a nightmare. The killer lurked in the shadows, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. He had been stalking Luna for weeks, and tonight was the night he had been planning for to end her life. He crept closer and closer, his footsteps silent on the weathered boards. He was careful not to be seen, but Luna's keen eyes spotted him just as he reached out to grab her. She gasped as she felt his hands close around her ankles, pulling her toward the dark water. Desperately, she tried to hold onto the pier, but it was no use. The killer had won, and Luna was sinking into the depths. Panicking, she kicked her feet frantically, trying to get free, but the grip on her ankles was too strong. In the end, all she could do was surrender to the darkness of the ocean, and let the water take her away. As the last bubbles of air left her lips, the killer shouted out a triumphant laugh. His mission had been accomplished. Once upon a time, there was a wealthy family living in a grand mansion. The owners of the house were always looked after by their faithful maid, Margaret. Margaret was a middle-aged woman, and she had been working for the family for over a decade. At first, there was no sign of trouble and the family trusted Margaret completely. But soon, strange things started happening at the mansion. Valuables went missing and items were moved from place to place without explanation. The family started to suspect that their maid was up to something. Eventually, their suspicions were confirmed when they discovered that Margaret had been murdering them one by one. She had been poisoning them with drugs and even cutting power lines to cause accidents. Desperate to save themselves, the family locked themselves in a secret chamber within the mansion. But Margaret had already devised an ingenious plan. She was able to break into the chamber and kill the remaining family members. In the end, she was the only one left alive in the mansion.
Once upon a time, there was a girl named Julie. She was a good girl who had never smoked a cigarette in her life. However, one day Julie was at a party, and all of the other guests were pressuring her to take a puff of a cigarette. Despite her reluctance and fear, Julie found herself being forced to take the cigarette. She took a deep breath and slowly felt the smoke fill her lungs. Although she initially resisted, Julie quickly became addicted to smoking. She was soon buying a pack of cigarettes a day, and finding it hard to breathe without one in her mouth. In just a few months, Julie had become a smoker. However, her addiction to smoking came at a price. The cigarettes had dulled her senses and made her ill. She was constantly coughing and having trouble breathing. As time went on, Julie became thin, frail and weak. One day, Julie was rushed to the hospital due to severe chest pain. The doctor's examination revealed that her lungs had been irreparably damaged by the cigarettes, and she had developed terminal lung cancer. Despite their best efforts, the doctors could not save her, and in the end, Julie died from her addiction to smoking. Emerson had always known that something was wrong with her parents. They were cold, distant, and often cruel in ways that she struggled to understand. When she was young, they would beat her with belts and cords, leaving welts on her skin that she was ashamed to show. They never showed her any affection, leaving her feelings like she didn't belong. As Emerson grew older, her parents' cruelty increased. They would lock her in the basement for days at a time with no food or water, and often denying her basic necessities such as a bathroom or bed. She knew they wanted to break her will and make her obey them, but it only made her more determined to find a way out. One day, while locked in the basement, her parents came down with a pair of scissors. Before she could react, they cut off her tongue and took out her eyes, leaving her speechless and unable to cry for help. She was now completely powerless to do anything but accept the horrific suffering her parents imposed on her. The days of torture went on for months, but the physical and emotional damage done to her was too much. She was damaged beyond repair and had lost the will to live. She was never able to escape her parents' abuse. Emerson's tragedy ended one night when she took her own life.
Amy had always been a bit different from other kids her age. She was always quiet, hardly spoke to anyone, and barely socialized. It wasn't until a few years ago, when her family started to realize that Amy was experiencing something far more severe than just shyness. It all started with a sudden outburst of rage. Amy had grabbed a knife from the kitchen and tried to stab her stepmother. Thankfully, her stepmother was able to wrestle the knife away from her, and no harm was done. It was then that her family realized that there was something much deeper going on inside of Amy, and they sought out help. The doctors determined that Amy had dissociative identity disorder. It explained the sudden changes in behavior, as well as the different personalities that would surface. When Amy was in her good personality, she was caring and kind, like a normal girl. She would help her stepmother in chores. But in her bad personality, she was prone to violent rages, often lashing out at those around her and sometimes even throwing dishes. One time Amy's stepmother woke up in fear when she saw Amy standing by the nightstand holding a hammer in her hand. She would also turn on and off the lights to scare them. Amy's family was forced to live in fear of what could happen next. Any time she was left unattended, there was a risk that her bad personality could take over and put everyone in danger. They never knew when or where it would happen, so they had to be extra vigilant about her safety. One time she tried to kill herself but was showing her father that her stepmother is trying to kill her. Amy's family took her to therapists to help her overcome her dissociative identity disorder, but only Amy knew that she was pretending to have dissociative identity disorder in order to kill her stepmother.
Grace is a young woman who falls in love with Alex, a charming heir to the wealthy Ladomas family. They quickly get engaged and plan to have their wedding at the Ladomas sprawling estate. When Grace arrives, she is welcomed by Alex's extended family, but quickly finds out that the Ladomas family have an odd tradition. On the night of Alex and Grace's wedding, they must all play a game of hide and seek. If Grace can survive until dawn without being caught, she will be accepted into the family. However, if the family finds her before sunrise, she will be sacrificed in a dark ritual. Throughout the night, Grace is pursued by the family members, who are determined to kill her in order to carry on their tradition. They chose their weapons to kill her. Some have knives, some have guns, and some have special places to keep an eye out. As Grace finds out that her life is online and they are trying to kill her, she plans to run away but soon finds out that the main doors and the gate is locked. She tries to squeeze herself through the gate bars and succeed, but was bleeding badly. When she was out, one of the family member was in the car and caught her. They tied her up and started their ritual. In the end, however, she comes out victorious and Alex's family is destroyed. As she sat outside on the stairs, she heard the police sirens nearby. She lights up her cigarette and exhales it.
It was a beautiful summer day when Evelyn and her classmates decided to go to the lake for a picnic. The sun was shining bright, and the water was cool and inviting. However, the day soon turned into a nightmare when Evelyn, who was swimming in the lake, was suddenly hit by a speeding motorboat. The impact of the collision caused her to lose her arms up to her elbows. After the accident, she had to learn how to adapt to her new situation and develop new skills, such as using computer technology with her feet instead of her hands. Despite the tragedy, Evelyn tried her best to adjust to her new life. She learned to use prosthetic arms and reintegrated into school and other activities. But, unfortunately, Evelyn experienced a lot of teasing from her classmates, especially due to her prosthetic arms. They mocked her for being different and tried to humiliate her whenever they got the chance. They used to take Evelyn to an empty classroom and would take off her prosthetics arm and hide them in school. Evelyn would cry and search for her prosthetics arm all night. Evelyn was determined to stop the bullies, but she didn't know how. After some time, she had an idea. She decided that the only way to make the bullies feel the same pain she was feeling was to do the unthinkable. One night, Evelyn's parents came back from their vacation and were shocked when they saw Evelyn's room. They took Evelyn to the police and questioned her about the bizarre things she did to her classmates. The police asked Evelyn why she did that. Evelyn said, "I couldn't take it anymore. I had an idea. I decided that the only way to make the bullies feel the same pain was to make them go through the pain that I went through. So I cut off their arms and hung them in my room ceiling. Is it not fascinating to watch them as they move with the air? The way they dance with the air. I did it. And I don't regret anything at all." Evelyn's parents were so shocked they took her to psychiatric. Evelyn is not the same as she was. Evelyn's parents are hopeless that their daughter will not be healed from the bruises the bullies gave her, and they will never forget what she did to them. Once upon a time, there were twin sisters, Lily and Rose, who were inseparable since birth. They grew up playing together, going to the same school, and even dreamed of the same things. They both wanted to become successful businesswomen. However, as time went on, Lily began to feel increasingly jealous of Rose. While Rose was becoming more beautiful and successful, Lily felt left behind and unable to keep up. She became bitter and resentful. One day, Lily had enough. She planned to exact her revenge on Rose by killing her. She watched her twin sister carefully and waited for the right moment to strike. One evening, when Rose was sleeping, Lily went to the kitchen and picked up a knife. Lily crept into her bedroom and quietly and carefully stabbed her. The next morning, Rose was found dead in her bedroom covered in blood. The police were called and they immediately suspected Lily. After months of investigation and questioning, they finally determined that Lily was responsible for her sister's death. They arrested her and charged her with murder. At the trial, Lily pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. Even though she was incarcerated, her hatred and jealousy of her sister never faded, and she spent her days reflecting on her crime and regretting what she had done. Years passed and eventually, Lily was released from prison. She had served her time and wanted to make amends for what she had done. She tried to move on with her life, but the guilt of murdering her twin sister always remained. Lily spent the rest of her life apologizing to her family and hoping for forgiveness.
Once upon a time, in a small town, there was a legend about a scarecrow that would wander around at night. The scarecrow was said to have supernatural powers and would terrorize anyone who dared to cross its path. Most people believed that it was nothing more than a tale, but some swore they had seen the scarecrow and that it was real. One night, a young girl was walking down a dark, abandoned road near her house. She had heard the stories about the scarecrow and she was scared. She walked faster, as she wanted to get home. However, as she passed the thickest of trees, she heard a rustling in the bushes. Suddenly, out of the darkness, emerged the figure of a scarecrow. The girl screamed and quickly ran away, but she could feel the presence of the scarecrow following her. She kept running, until she reached her house, but the scarecrow was still behind her. She quickly ran inside and shut the door. As the morning rose, the girl's family and the police were mystified when they found her dead body inside her bedroom. The girl's body was draped with a tattered piece of burlap cloth, and draped around her neck was a bundle of straw. Her family and the police soon realized that the mysterious scarecrow was not a ghost, but the dead body of the girl herself. The authorities concluded that the girl had become so scared of the scarecrow that she had tied herself up with a piece of burlap cloth and covered her body in straw in order to disguise herself. Unfortunately, the fear and shock of the scarecrow had been too much for her and she died of a heart attack. The girl's family was devastated by the tragedy and they buried her in the cemetery, with a small shrine dedicated to her memory. To this day, they still light candles in her memory, in hopes that one day the scarecrow's ghost will be laid to rest. In the small town of Auburn, a creature lived within the walls of the old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. This creature was known by the townspeople as the Wall Monster. It had long, spindly legs and arms that could extend and reach through even the smallest of cracks and crevices. At night, the Wall Monster would come out of its hideaway in the walls and wander the streets of Auburn, looking for unsuspecting children. It would then snatch them up without anyone noticing, and drag them back to its home in the walls of the old abandoned house. The townspeople were all too scared to go near the old abandoned house, so no one ever realized what was happening. For months, the Wall Monster was able to continue kidnapping children. Until one day a brave young girl decided to investigate. She snuck into the abandoned house and discovered the creature lurking in the walls. She quickly ran back to town to warn the people of the danger. And together they mounted a rescue mission. They searched the walls of the abandoned house and eventually found where the Wall Monster had been hiding all the kidnapped children. The secret room contained the terrified children, and with the help of the brave girl, they were all rescued and brought home safely. Though the Wall Monster is gone now, parents in Auburn now warn their children never to wander too far away at night, as they still remember the story of the Wall Monster who lived in the walls.